So the first question is, this is about who to talk to. Who should I reach out to initially in the sales process? CEO, CIO, head of a department that will actually use the product. If multiple departments will be involved in the decision, how do we ensure that all of them are convinced to use our product? So the best way to go about stakeholders, and I'm assuming this question is coming from somebody who is not quite sure who is the best stakeholder for them. So they're pretty early on in their sales process. So what you want to do is first map out all of the people that could be involved in buying your product. If you are so unfamiliar with what it takes to sell your product, go talk to somebody, maybe another YC founder who has sold to that market, and ask them who the stakeholders are. But that's like the kind of problem that you should solve day one. No excuses, right? So you should know generally who is involved in the sales process. Once you have that, what you want to do is, and this is why knowing your customers is really helpful, and why I really, especially if you're new to a particular segment of the market, I highly recommend going and talking to as many of those people as quickly as possible, because you can't be good at sales if you don't know your customers. Like, there is no shortcut around that. You do need to gain that knowledge, and need to gain it as fast as possible. So assuming some level of knowledge of your market, you list out the stakeholders, and then I would list out what would get this person promoted and what would prevent them from getting promoted. And how do I fit within that stream, right? So if you are something that could get them promoted, and be honest about the answer, right? Like, don't force something, that is not really a needle mover for that person. If you, and what you do and the outcome that you believe you can have for this customer will get them promoted, that's a great stakeholder to start with. So that is going to be somebody that will push to close the deal. So most deals are going to have, champions, they're going to have influencers, and they're going to have blockers. Usually they'll have an economic buyer that might have an overlapping role with the champion, or it might be like the champion's boss or their boss's boss. And so you kind of want to start mapping that out. If there's a particular function within a company where, whether it's usually if you get somebody promoted, it's also the thing that's going to get their boss, promoted eventually. And so that's usually these functionally align. So if the a low-level security person has to review your contract, doesn't like you, you're also a problem for the head of the security, right? So usually you have functional alignment in terms of whether they are very excited about you, or if they're kind of an influencer, or they're a blocker for the deal. So if you don't get them promoted, then the next question is something that we do, like, could it get them, could it stop them from getting promoted, or like get them fired, right? And usually a lot of deals will have at least one role that has to be involved in the deal, who does not benefit from the upside of your deal, but suffers if there is downside from your deal. Data breach, security problem, I don't know. So, usually it's like someone in IT or security or finance, I don't know. And so, but either way, you can identify them by asking, like, will I get this person promoted, or will I get them fired? And so folks that are not aligned to the upside but are affected negatively if there is downside, are almost always involved in deals, because the way organizations are structured is you have people that maximize upside, and you have people that minimize risk, because you need some balance of those two things. Like, the right tension needs to be there for an organization to thrive. and sustain itself. And so in deals, you have the person that's like YOLO, and then you have the one that's like, okay, well, we need to make sure we don't burn down the house. And so the blockers are the worst people to start the conversation with. So I'll give you an example. And sometimes like they're kind of like a blocker slash influencer, so they're a little trickier to identify. So a really good example of a tricky one for us, for example, at Mutiny, our champions are the people that own a revenue number within a marketing team. They have a lead target, they have to meet that target. ABM, director of ABM, head of marketing, head of lead generation. Those are really great titles for us. Those are our champions. And also our economic buyers, usually a director level and above. A group that you might think would be a good starting place for us is the web team. But the challenge with the web team often is the web team or marketing operations. That's another group that's very involved. They do not share in the upside. They are not metriced on revenue, which is what Mutiny influences. We increase the leads and the revenue that a team can hit. And so the ops teams and the web teams, it's nice they want their company to make more money, but they are not like gonna get promoted or fired if their revenue is hit or missed a little bit. So they don't have that same level of motivation that their revenue generating teams do. And they are very technical and they use a lot of tools and they care a lot about how everything integrates with each other. So oftentimes for us, and they don't like to switch off of technology that they're using, because once a technology becomes commonplace within a company, then those teams are managing those products really carefully. They have really strong vendor relationships with incumbents. That can be a problem for us. And so while those people are lovely and we include them and we're really excited to work with them, they are not the best stakeholder to initiate a deal with. There are exceptions, but generally speaking, 9 out of 10 times, it's better for us to go through a revenue generating team. So that's kind of why you want to think about, like, how much of, the upside that your product generates is relevant for that customer. And then based on that, you can start to form stronger hypotheses around who might be good groups for you. Anyone that's like IT or security, that's all the way down to objection handler, right? Like web was more of like an influencer, but still not the best team to start with for us. But someone like, IT or security, like that's definitely someone that you want to encounter far later in the sales process. And the best way, if you have a few different options for champions, I recommend just reach out to multiple and just start to collect data. Like, again, there is no silver bullet you can do some research to get smarter by asking people who have sold to that buyer before, by understanding your customers, by doing a little bit of like thinking up front. But really, you're going to learn when you start selling to those people. So if there's 2 or 3 groups that you feel good about all of them, sell to all of them and see where you get the most traction. That's how we learned the web piece, for example. We thought web would be a great buyer for us. And then we realized, oh, wow, like we keep running into the same issue when we try to sell to this group. So that would be my advice for that piece. The next question here is, pick 2 to, let me see. How do you build a level of rapport with new potential customers? I'm experiencing that I'm treated differently as a startup founder than I was when I was a management consultant. How can our team incorporate our years of experience into these early conversations without coming across as arrogant? I would say preparation and practice, to be honest. I think that when you first start to pitch, you may not have your introduction crisp. And I think that people really underestimate how important that is. So you want to make sure that, let me make sure that this is still recording since I just stopped sharing my screen. Oh, good. Okay, it's still recording. So you want to write down your pitch. So don't just wing it. You need to practice, right? So script out, what is my pitch? What is my hook? What adds credibility to my story? And then that's what you want to start practicing live. And it'll take you some time, right? Like, don't be too hard on yourself. It's going to take some time to learn how to be good at sales, and how to speak with confidence and the right level of command about yourself and your background, and practice makes perfect. I would say the other thing is, people can be, there are very few people that start out just like super confident. Usually they're at two ends of the spectrum, and both are a little bit problematic for different reasons when you're doing early stage sales. So one is, assume in the middle of the spectrum, we've got confident. And then on one side, we've got too humble. So this is someone that just like thinks everything they're getting is because like they got lucky and they can't, take credit for anything. And they have a really hard time articulating like what makes them awesome. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we've got like a bit maybe, like insecure or chip on your shoulder, right? Which a lot of founders fall into that bucket. It's a great source for motivating you to achieve, but it can be a little tricky when you're approaching sales. And what you want to do is just get closer and closer to that middle, to the confidence zone, where you speak in an articulate and clear way about, why they should pay attention to you. But you are not arrogant or seem like a total waste of time. They're like, I don't even understand why I should spend 4 seconds with you, right? And the best ways to, if you're on the humble side, is script it out, write what are your accomplishments, like what gives you unique insight into this business. You have to have an answer to that question. Otherwise, like, I would question whether you're the right founder for the business, right? And I guarantee that you do. So just dig a little deeper and try to find what makes you a really good fit for this, whether it was a project you did during your PhD or, other successes that you've had, and try to package that up. And then if you're on the side where you can come across as arrogant, and you've gotten that feedback before, like a lot of people think like you might be arrogant or abrasive, then I think, again, you want to script it out and practice it and get feedback on it. But there, what helps is just, adding in a little bit of, I was lucky to blah, 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 or, just softening the language a little bit. So like, for example, if I'm introducing myself to someone in the Valley, they know what Gusto is, right? So all I have to say is like, I led marketing from this size to this size, and they already know that I have credibility to speak about marketing, which is how I introduce myself in this talk. If I'm speaking to someone or a company that's like in oil and gas in Texas, and they've never heard of Gusto, which I certainly do run into those types of customers, they don't know who Gusto is. Going from 10 to 500 employees means nothing to them. So I usually will say like, I led marketing and I grew our revenue from 200K to 50 million, or like whatever the number is. And so if there is context around the thing that you succeeded in, you can say less about it. If there is no context, then you have to say a little bit more. Otherwise, you're not going to get the credibility benefit that you were hoping to get from disclosing that little bit of information. So, I think when people introduce themselves and it sounds really good, we assume that, oh, it's just off the cuff. But people actually practice that. And so don't be shy about scripting it and practicing it. And just, you're sitting at dinner, or I guess not these days or in COVID, but, you're on a Zoom with another founder and just be like, hey, can I just, introduce myself for 30 seconds and tell me like Did it seem arrogant? Did it seem too humble? Did you want to spend time with me? Just get quick feedback on this, and just try different things until a good response to your introduction is like a face that looks engaged, maybe a head that's nodding. That's a good response to a good introduction. And like someone that draws in and is smiling when your intro is over, and they're excited to talk to you some more because they feel like this is going to be a good use of their time. Okay, next question. These are taking a lot longer than I thought, so maybe I'll go through them a little bit more quickly. Is there an easier way to get an introduction to bigger YC portfolio companies as startup founders? Let's see. So YC companies have access to other YC companies. And so when I was in YC, I just scraped the list. We enriched it using Clearbit APIs, and we reached out to people that fit certain criteria for us. So if you have access to that, that's probably the most efficient way of doing it. But either way, you want to be really personalized, because I think over time, as the list of people hitting YC founders has gone up, the bar for people responding has also gone up. And then the next question, how effective is social media advertising in the enterprise space? I don't think it's super effective, especially for an early stage founder. So advertising is not a great idea at this stage. I think even like ABM ads on LinkedIn and these different platforms are still kind of questionable. People can't really prove ROI on them. If you were to use a social platform, I would say LinkedIn is probably the best one, but try invites and stuff like that before buying ads. I'm generally against advertising especially for enterprise at the early stage. Next question, how do we convince an already existing enterprise business to take a chance with us and work with us when our MVP looks a bit scrappy? A non-binding letter of intent is all good, but how can we actually convince them to start selling on our platform? So this one is super common, and the framework that I use, which another founder kind of introduced me to, is lily pads. So initially you start out, and let's say like you want to cross the lake, right? And what's on the other side? You want $1 million enterprise contract. But you're small and nobody knows you, and your product doesn't work that well. And you have no kind of brand recognition, and your credibility is low. So it's really hard to get that thing. And so one thing that's helpful is, like, if I can't get the thing that I want, like, what's a lily pad that's going to help me get closer to the other side of the lake? And the goal of lily pads is you don't want to stay on them for too long. It's just meant to get you to the next lily pad. So for example, maybe you want a $1 million annual contract, but a lily pad to that is a 3-month paid pilot, right? Maybe a 3-month paid pilot is still too far away. And so maybe a heavily discounted pilot where you do all of the work. Sometimes maybe even something for free for 1 month might be the right way. The goal is, you don't want to do that forever, but essentially try for the thing that you want, but then quickly pivot to a lily pad, like if you can't get that, right? So for example, our competitors, when I was going through YC, they were selling their product for, product that we thought was in a comparable space for like $3,000 a month. We said, okay, let's go with $1,000 because like we don't have a lot of their features, and $1,000 still clears the bar where we know that if we can get $1,000, we can probably get $2,000 or $3,000 eventually as we add more features. But if we get $50, like we don't really know if we can ever get to a mid-market sale. And so we went with $1,000. And then, I started having conversations with people on selling it, and I was like, it's $1,000. And then nobody was buying it. And so then, we didn't even have a product at that point. We just had an API, right? So the front end wasn't even built. I couldn't even demo it. And so then, for us, I was like, okay, we just burned through a week without getting a customer. And so right now we need a customer, because until we have a customer, we don't understand the workflows. So forget sales and revenue, like we need to understand what is the workflow so we can design the UI. And so at that point, a very cheap or free customer was worth it for us. And so we signed our first customer at $100 a month. And that was not the right long-term customer. They were too small for us, but they were great. They were the first lily pad. Like, it allowed us to get to have a customer that I could speak credibly to their use case when I was selling to other people. And it allowed us to understand the workflow. So now, we built the UI, and I could speak to personalization in a much more, credible way as I was talking to customers. And so then from there, our next one was $300 a month. And then quickly after that, it was $1,000 a month. And then we kind of raised from there. So I would say you have to be scrappy, and you have to be willing to experiment. And especially if you're very early on and you don't have many customers, it's okay to make changes. But I would just try to the extent that you can, don't stick too long with that sort of strategy, right? Like, if you give your first pilot for free, if you feel like that's what you need, but try to get paid for the second one, right? But don't, what you're trying to balance is speed of learning, while making sure that you're negotiating the right rates. And so at the end of the day, what matters is that you are moving forward, and that every single, lily pad gets you a little closer to the other side. And so, just experiment, go low, and then keep raising your prices, or, keep giving away less freebies to get to what you want. And usually I recommend charging something if you can. Like in our case, we charged $100. It was still better than giving it for free. And then, so let's see, is there, what is the best way to respond to a customer who says we can build that ourselves during your initial conversations about your product? I would ask them, why do you want to build it yourself? And find out what is their angle. Usually it's cost, but sometimes it's flexibility. And maybe other reasons. I think it's important to know, because then you can build a case against it. There are a few customers where maybe they should build it themselves, and at least long term, but you could argue, hey, in the short term, when you're doing a lot of experimentation, it's better for you to use someone else's product. And then when you prove it, that this is something you need, then maybe it gets too expensive, then you build it yourself. So that could be a way to get in. The other thing you could do is, if the issue is cost, usually it's because people massively undervalue human cost versus cash cost. And so building a very quick ROI model where it's okay, let's estimate this, how many hours would this take, blah, blah, blah. And then putting in the cost is really helpful. You may not get the stakeholder to sit down and do this with you. So you may want to build it and say, I've been really reflecting on this cost thing and the build versus buy decision that you brought up, and I'm just really trying to understand it. So I put together this this little costing model, and I'm just curious, did I get these numbers right? Is this how you view it? And if this is the case, this obviously costs more than what what I was going to charge you for this product. What can I do to get you to try this for 3 months? I think with those types of ROI analysis, it's important to not make them feel like an idiot, but rather make it a co-discovery. If you can get them to join in on that process and be like, hey, if I could show you that we could be 5 times cheaper than you building it yourself, would you give us a shot? And if they said yes, then they're kind of in the driver's seat, and then you can go do all the work of building the ROI calculator, and they can tell you, no, you overestimated this, but you're not catching their mistake, but rather you're trying to get them to change their mind. And so it's a different kind of mentality that might end up being more successful for you. If the issue is flexibility, you'll need a different angle for why using a product gives them more flexibility than building it. But again, when you're selling something, you are much more motivated, right? And so put skin in the game, do the work, shepherd the process through for the customer. They are not going to be as motivated as you are to go and solve the problem, or to make the business case for you. At least not initially, not until they, something catches their eye. Okay, the next set are on pricing. We have negotiated different prices with different customers. Is this expected, or will this create problems or bad will in the future? No, it's totally fine. I think early on, everyone's gonna have a different price, especially in B2B and enterprise. One thing you can do is put a confidentiality clause in the contract, or even verbally, like, or over email, be like, we ask that you don't share this price. Often actually the response is really positive, because they're like, oh my gosh, I negotiated such a low price that I am legally obligated not to tell anyone. So usually that puts a smile on people's face versus upset them. And it also protects you, especially if it's in their contract. It means they can't go tell other people about it. And what I like doing is, I think it is good to have a price sheet. Don't just randomly make numbers up. Have something that's like a price sheet, especially if you're on the mid-market side. But then if you wanted to give people more discounts, then that's fine. Just make the discount explicit, so that, and let them know that this is a discount for a new customer. We really wanted to work with you. This is not necessarily something that we can give you in the future. Just so that, when it comes time for renewal, you're not totally screwed if you need to raise the price. You haven't anchored too low. Then the next question is, how do you come up with the right pricing when you can't look to competitors for comparable pricing? I don't know if this means your competitors don't publish their pricing. If they don't, you need to, there's very little excuse for not getting important pieces of information about your market and your customers. So I'm usually very adamant about talk to customers, be scrappy, find people, get that information. You can't fly blind and be good at sales, right? So if you have, some version of the problem that you're solving, I'm sure these people are buying. So if you don't have a direct competitor, find the next closest thing that you can. Customers that have purchased a product are the best source for getting pricing information. And anybody that you talk to, you can, especially ones that decide not to buy from you, they'll gladly give you prices for other things that they're using. You can even if they're behind you, just email them and be like, hey, I was wondering how much you pay. So no excuse for not knowing comparative pricing. You have to understand your market really, really well to be able to make smart choices quickly within it. But even once you know your competitor's pricing, that doesn't mean you know exactly what you should price. So at that point, I would say use your instinct and intuition and make something up and experiment. And don't waste too much time trying to come up with the perfect pricing. Pricing should only take a really long time and a lot of crazy analysis. When you are much bigger, you're looking to make changes, you have a big install base, and you have to understand cannibalization and all of these things. And you have to understand potential changes in conversion rate. At this stage, just understand your market pricing, that's important, but then put a stick in the ground, and then just as you start selling, that'll be your ultimate feedback, and whether it's too expensive, not expensive enough. If everyone's saying yes, then you're probably not expensive enough. There should be some level of friction. How do you strategize pricing for SMB versus larger enterprise clients if you can sell a product to both of these types of customers? So I think this question is really about how do you make sure enterprises pay more? There's kind of two ways to do that. One is you would have features that enterprises absolutely need. A lot of times this is integrations with enterprise-y tools. So in the MarTech space, it's like Salesforce integration. So you don't have Salesforce when you are below 30 employees. So we know that anybody that has Salesforce We can have a really cheap price for if you don't require Salesforce integration because we know that you're super tiny. And then for everybody else, price jumps up basically. So you can kind of anchor at certain features that are tied to existing tooling that the company uses, or features that are truly like required by enterprise, right? So another example of that for us at Mutiny is we have a lot of like recommendation, type of features that are just more relevant for larger websites. And so those go in our higher enterprise package. The second thing is it's really good to tie your pricing to a lever that grows as the value of your product grows. So for example, number of users. For us, it's number of website visitors. And our pricing, usually, an enterprise account is somebody that's going to get a lot more value out of your product, right? They have more users, more of something, some unit of value that your product is delivering. So if that is baked into your pricing structure, a lot of times that also solves your enterprise pricing discrimination problem. Next question on sales cycle. Most of the enterprise customers we're working with have a very long and complicated onboarding process for service providers. Is there anything we can do to shorten the sales cycle timeframe? Yes, you can make it more explicit upfront and organized. So basically, no, you can't change the steps usually, but yes, you can significantly improve the project management of it. So usually what you would want to do is before you start the procurement process, you would sit down with your stakeholder. It's also good to get a sense for, have they gone through a procurement process before or not? Then you kind of have a sense of like, how savvy is this buyer? It's so much easier to run through procurement with somebody who's bought a lot of software versus someone junior who hasn't. It's just sort of, it's one of those unfortunate things where you can't choose your champions, but at least if you know how bad they're going to be at managing the process, you can be more on top of it on purpose. But typically what we do is, we would say, okay, so before we start the procurement process, let's map it out. What are the steps? Okay, step one, security. The security review first, or is it legal? No, legal likes to review first and then security. Making that up. It's actually usually security reviews first and then legal. A lot of times finance has to approve before any of those people look at it. Even though your economic decision maker, right? So your economic buyer is sitting in a functional group, and they are still considered your economic buyer. It's like the VP of whatever that makes the decision. Finance still has to approve decisions, especially when the company gets bigger. It's a way of centrally managing the overall, P&L of the business. So it's not like a huge decision. It's not like usually most things go through at that point, but it is still, they do have to make a business case to finance, and it has to go through, especially in the current economic environment. That finance approval has become a little bit more important than previously. They're a little more rigid with what they want to see. So, okay, there's a finance approval. For every step, what you want to get is, okay, what does that look like? Who's involved in that step? Okay, who would, if finance, what does finance has to approve mean, essentially, right? Is there a committee? Okay, great. How often does the committee meet? Is it like, do you get email approval, or do you have to like go and present? No, we have to go present to the committee. Committee meets once a month. Okay, that's super helpful information for you to have, because we better not miss that committee meeting, or you have to wait another month, right? Okay, what do they need? Like, do you have a sense of what they need to get? Have you gotten anything approved in that before? What do you think they need? Can we get some intel on that? And so you want to, like, I would spend 30 solid minutes with your main champion, who's now super pumped to get your product, sit on the same side of the table and say, I want to do a really good, I know like this is going to have so much value for you. We're so excited to work with you. And I know that the procurement process can be kind of challenging, and I want to do a really good job. So it would be really great if we sit down and, to the best of our knowledge, map out the process so that I can be on top of it. almost always the stakeholder is very willing to do this. And it is so much more effective to do this upfront than mid-process where you're just pinging them constantly. And they start to become mixed with the procurement process. Whereas this way, it's you and them, one team. Procurement process is the enemy that you are trying to kind of, manage together. So make sure to do that. And the level of specificity is high, right? Okay, and then finally, we're ready to sign. Who signs? What's their name, right? Email address of who signs. Like, you need all of this information. Maybe the email address of who signs you don't need when you're starting a procurement process, but you need the name of who's going to sign. Like, you need all the way down to the signatory name. Estimate of how long these different steps take. The other thing that I think is really important for very large enterprise deals, escalation process. What if we don't get approval in this step? Or what if something takes a lot longer? What is the escalation path? Large enterprises all have escalation paths. And so that's the level of clarity you want to have before you start the process. You agree to a timeline with your stakeholder of this is when we want to have this deal signed. A lot of times I like to tie a discount to that date and be like, okay, because this is this quarter or, before the end of the month, if we can get it done, like I can give you this discount baked in. And then that way you kind of have a reason and your stakeholder is a little bit more motivated. But that's kind of a personal choice, it's more the project management and the clear deadline that's more important. And so, and then you just follow that process, and now you have a record to go back to when things are falling out of place. There's a mutually agreed upon roadmap. So you're not helpless sending emails into the ether. No one's responding to you, that kind of thing. Next question. What are your thoughts on a mixed consulting model approach to sales? I believe I could gain deeper insight if I work more closely with a few early customers rather than building a product that only addresses surface level problems for a larger number of early users. Is this a logical strategy when selling to enterprise clients? Absolutely. And you should do that. You should sell to, you should get really deep with your customers. I think a lot of times when you are at a stage where you are not sure, like you haven't yet gotten to product market fit, you're very early days, like you don't even have the option of selling to lots of people. So you're simultaneously working really hard to get customers while building alongside those very few customers. But if you find yourself that you are in a position where you have the choice, I would say, give yourself some short period of time to work with what's called design partners, which is, I think, what you're describing in this question. I do really like having revenue be a goal. At Mutiny, revenue has always been a goal for us. And it's a really good way to make sure that you move quickly, you don't stall as a business. But we had, for example, there was like a 2-3 month period after YC where we were like, we're gonna deprioritize revenue and just focus on working with the 10 customers we acquired during YC to make them really successful, because it was just it was just me and my co-founder. We had no employees. We had to hire employees and like help all of these people be successful. And so we decided to take 3 months off and just go deep with the customers. But generally speaking, like, I think you want to figure out how to do both. But certainly in the very first 2-3 months, I think that's a fine strategy. And people usually call those customers design partners. Okay, are there some general timelines you can share for the expected sales cycle period, or what qualifies as a good rate to close deals? Very specifically, for 5 to 25K per month, is 4 to 8 weeks a good sales cycle? What are some factors that can lower the sales cycle? Is 40% a good close rate? 40% is an exceptional close rate. It's not sustainable. I would say established company with a great product, who is differentiated is like 30%. So 40% is really good. We had a 40% close rate in the very early days of Gusto when all of our business was like referral driven. We weren't doing a lot of marketing. So it's really good. On average, yeah, like 30% is really good. Anything above 20% like is pretty scalable. Anything below 20%, you're gonna wanna eventually figure out how to raise it. And it's a little dependent on the industry. So some industries, people do not take first meetings, so they don't get to the qualified state very easily, but when they do, they close. Other industries like marketing technology, they are very curious to see what's out there. So we actually get a lot of qualified deals that have budget. It's the decision maker. They're interested. So by all measures, they are qualified. But then just the nature of the MarTech industry, the close rates are lower versus like IT or something like that. And so, it's good to get benchmarks from like even one company in your similar space to have a sense. Just reach out to the person with the title at the company, like reach out to like 3 of them and just be like, hey, I'm a new founder. I'm just trying to benchmark. I'm building this company. Can you tell me like what would be a good close rate that I could expect in this space? Like, what have you seen? And then they'll tell you. Cold outreach for advice, like is, people will respond to that. Not everyone will, but like, 1 out of 4 people will for sure. So don't be shy about getting intel on your market in that way. In terms of sales cycle, I would say a 5K deal, I would want to see less than a 4-week sales cycle probably. Usually in SMB, 2 to 4 weeks. In mid-market, 4 to 8 weeks. So mid-market being like a 25K deal, like 4 to 8 weeks. And then enterprise can be 3 months and above. However, I will say very early on, people don't really care about those metrics that much. So if you are pre-seed funding, like no one really cares about what those numbers are for you, sales cycle or close rate. When you get to Series A, it matters. So at some point, as you approach that, those types of things start to matter. And you do want to keep an eye on them and learn from them. But they don't matter in the first like 6 months of building your company. So I wouldn't worry too much. You're just trying to get things closed so that you can learn. How do you manage expectations of your first enterprise clients? We've learned that they take issues like privacy, security, compliance for data very seriously, and the process to meet these requirements can take months. Do you have any advice on how to navigate these conversations? Yeah, I would say it's hard because you may need to go down market. That's a reality, right? There's a reason not everybody starts in enterprise. You start a little bit smaller so that you can build features and build a product that's differentiated and solves a problem before you get bogged down in security requirements. So, we are just starting to go into enterprise because we just got our SOC 2 compliance and, a bunch of other stuff that allows us to sell into enterprise. So might not be the right market timing for you because the more time you spend building non-differentiated features, the more problematic it is. If you're in a space where you have to sell to enterprise and you don't have a mid-market option, then see if you can cut scope and just get really good at negotiating. So sometimes cutting scope can help you remove sensitivity. So you can say, what's your security process for this level of data versus this level versus this level? So like, for example, for Mutiny, when we integrate Salesforce, high sensitivity. Like everybody, we have to go through a data processing agreement before we can integrate Salesforce as a data source into Mutiny. But there's other data sources that nobody cares about. And so it's just a little easier. People are less, they're more careful if something goes on their corporate website versus it goes on other landing pages. So just think about like, is there a way to reduce scope to not require as rigorous of a process? Usually anything that sits in the product the highest security security reviews, usually, at least in my experience. So see if you can cut scope then, if you can't go lower. And then just, yeah, get really good at negotiating. We have a cloud SaaS solution. If we deploy our solution on-premise for a client, they could access our source code and reverse engineer our algorithm. How can we protect ourselves legally, technically? Should we just accept the risk? Well, legally, you can certainly protect yourself. So you should have a pretty tight IP clause in your contracts for sure. I mean, I would kind of, to assess the risk, maybe ask yourself, like, is this common? Is this customer kind of like a partner that could be a competitor? You know, is there like a buy build issue? You know, you might be in a unique situation where this is actually a risk and the customer is being sketchy and they've done this to other people, or this is something that happens in your industry, especially if your technology is like super proprietary and you're trying to patent it or something like that, then maybe. Generally speaking, I find that founders are scared of things that don't really matter. Like, it's like they're inheriting big company problems at a stage where you should just be worried about survival. So generally speaking, that's not really a big deal. You should just get customers, grow as fast as you can. You know, it's very rare for these things to happen. When they happen, they get blown up. We all read about it. But they're not very common. But just, you know, I don't want to be too flippant about this. Like, you might be in a unique industry where this is a problem for you. So then finally, should I take a different approach when I get feedback from enterprise customers? I've been able to easily collect feedback from a B2C model, but it seems more complicated with a larger company. How can I know if the feedback I'm getting is from the right person? How do I trust the feedback? Should I talk to the people who use the software, their managers, purchasing decision makers? So I would say who you talk to depends on what you're trying to get feedback on. If you're trying to get feedback on the buying process, you need to talk to somebody who's bought. If you're getting feedback on the usage, you need to talk to the person that's using it. So that part might be more straightforward. But generally speaking, the best feedback, and really the only feedback that I personally trust, is from someone buying or not buying the product. So usually, like, the moment that you start selling is when you have real feedback on product market fit. And the reason is, product market fit is not like a sequential thing. You don't build product and then find market. You are building product and finding market and iterating on both at the same time. And so because, like, these decisions are quite intertwined, it's better to listen to people when they are, because how do you know you have market? Someone gives you money, right? That's the market part of product market fit, right? Especially in B2B, because it's rare to have like freemium stuff, right? So someone has to, like, give you money, and that's how you become a viable business. And so if and usually people make up a bunch of things that aren't really relevant. And it's only, did they buy or did they not buy, and why or why not? That's the feedback that you can really trust in the service of finding product market fit. And so I recommend getting to that step as soon as possible. If you need some feedback on, you know, some other aspect before you have a sellable product, then, you know, certainly you can talk to you know, customers that would have been the correct sort of buyer or user of the product. But generally speaking, I don't think that feedback means much when it comes to assessing product market fit, which means it doesn't mean that much when it comes to making pricing decisions, feature product development decisions. You really want to get to selling. Great. Well, this took a lot longer than I anticipated, but I did have 5 pages of questions. Hopefully it was useful for you.